second inauguration of President Donald Trump, promising a new age for America. Good evening, everyone. Welcome in here to ABC Action News at 5. I'm Paul Agrone.
And I'm Nadine Yanis. Lauren is off tonight. During his inaugural address, President Trump was critical of the outgoing Biden administration, promising to take swift action, including reversing course on immigration and promising to put America first.
From this moment on, America's decline is over. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
And those deportations could start as soon as tomorrow.
Meanwhile, President Trump promising more than 200 executive actions on day one today, among them immigration, declaring a national energy emergency, as well as eliminating the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in the federal government and repealing former President Joe Biden's rules on electric cars. We want to bring in now Scripps News correspondent Nate Reed live on Capitol Hill tonight. Nate, the president already signing some of those executive orders today. What have we learned so far?
Well, Paul, very few of those executive orders have actually already been signed. For the most part, he officially nominated members of his cabinet so that the Senate can now try and confirm many of them. But that being said, when he takes the stage at the Capital One Arena in downtown D.C. shortly, his motorcade just arrived there. He is expected to address a number of those executive orders, including 10 or so specifically related to immigration. One of the things he wants to do, limit crossings on the southern border. He's hoping to do so by declaring a national border emergency. Furthermore, he's also trying to limit birthright citizenship. That is the citizenship you're granted if you are even the child of parents who were not born in this country, not here legally, but you are born in the United States. He says that he'll direct agencies to try and limit that at the beginning of his term. To be clear, there's a fair chance that a lot of these actions could be tied up in court as they are challenged. But again, the incoming Trump administration wasting no time to try and get as many of these executive actions on immigration across the gate as quickly as possible.
Yeah, they're moving fast, Nate. Meanwhile, President Trump's cabinet starting to fall in line as well. The Senate started confirming appointees earlier today. What are the first bills that they're supposed to tackle?
Well, in terms of appointments by the Senate is expected to take up the nomination of Marco Rubio as soon as later this evening. Of course, he's Florida's senior senator right now. There's a very good chance that by the end of the night, he could be the U.S. Secretary of State. I spoke with a Democratic lawmaker shortly ago. They told me that they're trying to run a hotline, effectively trying to get his nomination across the finish line by condensing as much of that time as possible, potentially confirming him as Secretary of State later this evening. I just caught up with him as well. He told me he was not aware of similar efforts. He's now walking with a much larger security detail than he had as senator. Now, in terms of legislation, the Lake and Riley Act, one of the very first orders of business for the Republican U.S. Senate. They're going to proceed to final passage on that later this evening. It will need to be passed by the House of Representatives. Then it can go to President Trump's desk as soon as later this week. That bill would expand the government's authority to detain people and expel them from the country, illegal immigrants, if they are accused of a crime, not just if they are convicted of one. So obviously the Senate chiming in on the early action of the incoming Trump administration, trying to give him as many authorities as possible. Again, a large part of this early focus on immigration.
Yeah, a lot about to happen, and we're only on day one. Nate, this is a narrow margin in Congress for Donald Trump. How does the president plan to navigate that? It would appear that he would do well, President Trump, if he were able to pull at least some Democratic support, even if it's just a few votes.
Well, in some cases, that is going to be necessary because of filibuster rules in the Senate. He will need to pull some Democratic support to pass the vast majority of legislation through the Senate. That being said, the narrow margins in the House of Representatives is really where Republicans could run into trouble. You've got fiscal conservative Republicans who don't like spending money, who are concerned about the federal deficit, who don't want to put into place some of the areas that Trump is potentially looking to legislate on, including trying to lower taxes. They could be a thorn in his side as he tries to pass large parts of his agenda, which could theoretically raise the deficit or could show on nonpartisan government agencies as potentially raising the deficit. So again, a lot of areas where he could run into trouble because of those extremely slim margins that he was given in Congress.
Either way, a lot of news is about to come our way. Nate Reed reporting tonight from Capitol Hill. Nate, thank you. In his final hours in office, former President Joe Biden issued several pardons in the case. The Trump administration ended up targeting them for investigations, among them former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, Dr. Anthony Fauci, as well as members of the Congressional January 6th Committee and former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Biden also issued preemptive pardons for his family, including his siblings and their spouses. President Biden said that the pardons did not necessarily mean any recipient is guilty of any crimes.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our political analyst, Dr. Susan McManus, now to talk about today's inauguration. Thank you for being here. We want to talk about President Trump today. He was very critical in his address against President Biden, but then the two also seemed very cordial today. They had tea together, they rode in the limo together. What do you make of this contrasting images on the outgoing and incoming?
Well, part of this is protocol and history and good manners, so to speak. And the other part is policy. And clearly there was a sharp contrast between Biden and Trump on virtually every policy. And that's not atypical when you have one party replacing the other in the White House to see these foci or focus on these policy differences.
Yeah, and very traditional values and policies, as you just talked about. Right. Let's go into the president's inaugural address. He had promised a new golden age for America, even talked about the U.S. possibly going to Mars. So what do you make of this? How feasible can it be?
Well, there are some examples here of past, present, future. Some are future aspirations that are not likely to occur in the first 2 or 3 months of administrations. Others are doable immediately. A wide range of things he talked about. But I think what it really reflects most is the fact that going into this election and ending with the election, 2/3 of Americans wanted a change in the direction of the country. So you saw a lot of that theme that's woven into his speech.
And we also just heard from Paul and Nate talking about the narrow margins that Republicans have in Congress. And the president says he wants to achieve a lot of this with bipartisan support. Can he make that happen? And could that be a signal that we can unify the country here?
It was very interesting. The most significant thing he said in his whole speech, he says, what do I want to be? I want to be a peacemaker and a unifier. Well, to do that, you're going to have to work across the aisle. There is some glimmers of hope in the fact that some of the confirmation hearings have indicated that Democrats in Congress are willing, perhaps, to go ahead and confirm these Republican nominees of the president. So there's a glimmer of hope there. And he saying, frankly, that I want to be a unifier and I want to be a peacemaker. And he well knows you can't do that if you don't have Republican and Democratic cooperation on a number of key issues.
And I think that is the hope for a lot of Americans now as coming together
Absolutely.
with this new president. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Dr. McManus.
Thank you.